A bright streak of fire tore through the sky, cutting across the endless darkness of space. Lieutenant Jonas Carter stood on the edge of the colony's perimeter, his visor scanning the incoming object. His heart pounded in his chest. The trajectory was wrong. This wasn't some stray meteor. It was a ship. A small one, plummeting fast. Jonas tapped his comms. "Command, we've got an unidentified vessel incoming. No ID tag. Looks damaged." A brief silence. Then a voice crackled in his ear. "Acknowledged, Lieutenant. Dispatching recon drones." The colony of Blackridge was a quiet outpost, far from the core human worlds. They mined minerals, built shelters, and kept their heads down. The war between humanity and the Valzir Empire had been silent for the past 5 years, but everyone knew it wasn't over. The Valzir considered humans nothing more than pests, barely worthy of recognition, let alone survival. Jonas sprinted toward the projected crash site, his boots kicking up dust as the wind howled. His squad followed, a team of hardened fighters, each carrying weapons modified for quick, lethal engagements. The air smelled of ozone, the telltale sign of a ship burning up in the atmosphere. Then came the impact. A shockwave of dust and debris exploded outward, shaking the ground beneath them. Jonas raised his arm to shield his visor from the blast. When the dust settled, a sleek alien escape pod sat in a smoldering crater, its metal plating glowing red-hot. "Eyes up," Jonas muttered, signaling his team to spread out. His grip tightened around his rifle. A deep groaning sound came from the pod as its hatch struggled to open. Jonas raised a fist, signaling his team to hold position. Then, with a hiss of steam, the hatch slid open. And there it was. Small, fragile, eyes wide with terror. An alien child. Jonas' breath caught. The creature couldn't have been more than 4 feet tall, its dark violet skin marred with cuts and bruises. Its large black eyes darted frantically, scanning its surroundings. A thin, silver garment clung to its body, torn in several places. It looked weak, scared, vulnerable. A Valzir. "Lieutenant, what the hell is this?" Sergeant Holt whispered, his weapon still raised. Jonas didn't answer. His mind raced. The Valzir never abandoned their own. If this child was here, alone, something had gone horribly wrong. The child flinched as Jonas took a step forward. It clutched a small metallic device in its trembling fingers. Jonas slowly lowered his weapon and raised a hand, palm open. "It's okay," he said gently. "We're not going to hurt you." The child didn't respond. Instead, its gaze darted skyward. Jonas turned just in time to see the warship. It came from the darkness, a silent predator among the stars. Black as night, its massive form blocked out a portion of the sky. Then, without warning, the attack began. A lance of blue energy shot down from the heavens, striking the colony's eastern district. Fire erupted as buildings crumbled into dust. The ground trembled beneath them. "Command, we are under attack," Jonas shouted into his comms. "Repeat, Valzir warship has engaged." The transmission cut to static. Jamming signal. The child let out a soft, terrified whimper, gripping Jonas' sleeve with trembling fingers. A new sound cut through the chaos. Whirring, mechanical, sharp. Jonas spun around just as sleek. Insect-like drones descended from the sky, their red optics locking onto the child. "Take cover," Jonas roared. Gunfire erupted as his team opened fire, bullets, and plasma rounds slamming into the incoming machines. The drones moved with eerie precision, evading some shots and taking others head-on. Sparks flew as one went down, its body crashing into the dirt in a heap of mangled metal. Jonas grabbed the child and ran, ducking behind a rock formation as plasma bolts scorched the ground where he had just stood. "They're targeting the kid," Holt yelled, blasting a drone out of the sky. Jonas knew why. If the Valzir were willing to send a warship to wipe out a colony over this one child, it meant the kid was important. Very important. A deafening explosion ripped through the sky as more energy blasts rained down, vaporizing everything they touched. The colony was being wiped clean. No survivors. No evidence. Fall back to the tunnels, Jonas ordered. The team moved fast, covering each other as they retreated. The child clung to Jonas, its breath ragged and panicked. "Why do they want you dead?" Jonas muttered, not expecting an answer. The child looked up at him, eyes filled with something more than fear. Desperation. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, it spoke. "They cannot. No." Jonas' stomach twisted. Whatever secret this child held, the Veil Zur were willing to commit genocide to keep it buried. More drones closed in, their metallic wings slicing through the air. Jonas and his squad reached the entrance to the underground tunnels just as another barrage of fire slammed into the surface behind them. The ground split apart, sending debris flying. Jonas pushed the child inside. "Move." His team dove into the tunnels as the sky above them turned into a blazing inferno. As they sprinted through the darkness, Jonas activated his wrist comm, trying to break through the jamming. "Blackridge is gone," he said between breaths. "We need reinforcements. We have a high-value asset." "Repeat, we have." A new voice cut through the static. "Lieutenant Carter," a deep, calm voice spoke in perfect human English. "You have something that belongs to us." Jonas slowed. The others turned to him, their faces pale. The Veil Zur never communicated directly. They saw humans as insects beneath their notice. But this was different. The voice continued, smooth and chilling. "Hand over the child, and we will let you and your team live. Resist, and you will suffer." Jonas clenched his jaw. He looked down at the trembling child, then back at his team. They all knew what the right move was, the logical move. Give up the child. Save themselves. But Jonas didn't believe in surrender. His grip tightened on his rifle. "Come and get him." The transmission cut out. A moment of silence. Then, the walls trembled. "They're coming," Holt whispered. Jonas turned to his team, his voice steady. "Then we make them regret it." And in that moment, humanity defied expectations once again. The underground tunnels stretched for miles beneath what had once been the colony of Blackridge. The air was damp, filled with the scent of earth and old metal. The only light came from the glow of Jonas Carter's visor and the occasional flickering emergency lamps left over from the original mining operations. The ground trembled above them, distant explosions echoing through the rock. The Veil Zur weren't stopping. They were wiping the entire colony off the map. Jonas glanced back at the child, who was clinging to his sleeve. Its dark, glassy eyes darted around, ears twitching at every sound. It was still afraid. He didn't blame it. Holt, the squad's heavy weapons specialist, was breathing heavily as he jogged beside Jonas. "Lieutenant, we need to talk about this. That warship up there. We don't have the firepower to take it on. And those drones. More are gonna come. A lot more." "We don't have to fight the warship," Jonas replied, keeping his pace steady. "We just have to keep moving." "And where exactly are we going?" "The old research outpost," Jonas said. "It's got a communications relay strong enough to break through their jamming field. We send a distress signal, and we hold until reinforcements arrive." Holt let out a dry laugh. "You really think Command's gonna send backup for one alien kid?" Jonas didn't answer. He wasn't sure himself. Humanity was at peace, at least on paper. If High Command believed this was just another skirmish, they might not intervene in time. But he wasn't about to let the Veil Zur decide who lived and who died. A new sound cut through the tunnel, the distant whirring of machines. Jonas raised his fist, and the squad froze. The child stiffened, gripping Jonas' sleeve even tighter. A red glow appeared in the darkness ahead, flickering like a dying flame. Then another. Then 5 more. Drones. They were waiting. Jonas barely had time to react before the first shot rang out. A streak of blue plasma shot down the tunnel, barely missing Holt's head. "Take cover," Jonas yelled, diving behind a pile of collapsed metal beams. Holt dropped to one knee, his heavy assault rifle roaring to life. Bullets sprayed through the narrow passage, slamming into the drones with sharp metallic cracks. One of them sparked and fell, but the others kept coming, their sleek forms twisting and dodging through the tunnel with terrifying precision. Jonas activated his visor's targeting system, locking onto a drone's weak spot. He fired twice, once to shatter its optics, and again to blast a hole through its core. The machine dropped instantly. The child let out a sharp cry as another drone swooped low, its bladed arms slicing through the air. Jonas grabbed the kid and rolled, just as the machine's weapon sliced into the ground where they had been standing. Holt fired a grenade round. The explosion sent metal shards flying, tearing through two more drones. Smoke filled the tunnel, but Jonas knew this wasn't over. Then came the footsteps. Not mechanical, not drones. Something worse. A dark figure stepped through the smoke, tall and eerily still. Its armor was unlike anything Jonas had seen before, sleek, black, and almost liquid-like in the way it reflected the dim tunnel lights. The helmet had no visible face, just a smooth, curved surface. The only thing Jonas could see were its eyes. Glowing red. A Valzur specter. Jonas had heard stories. The specters were the best of the best, genetically enhanced, faster, stronger, and deadlier than any human soldier. They didn't just kill their targets. They erased them. Jonas barely had time to react before the specter moved. It was fast. Too fast. In a blur, it closed the distance between them, its blade flashing. Jonas barely managed to raise his rifle in time. The blade struck the metal, sparks flying, but the force knocked him off balance. Holt fired, but the specter twisted its body at an impossible angle, dodging the shots with ease. Before Holt could fire again, the alien lunged, slamming a fist into his chest. Holt was a big man, built like a tank, but the impact sent him crashing into the tunnel wall with a sickening crack. Jonas rolled to his feet, firing point-blank. The specter dodged again, the bullet grazing its shoulder. For the first time, the alien hesitated. It bled. Not much, just a small cut, but it was enough. Jonas didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, slamming his rifle butt into the specter's head. The alien staggered back just enough for Holt, still gasping for breath, to raise his weapon. "Heat this," Holt snarled. He fired a single, high-explosive round. The shot struck the specter dead center, blasting it backward. It hit the ground, motionless. Smoke rose from the shattered armor. Jonas didn't wait to see if it was dead. "Move," he shouted, grabbing the child and sprinting down the tunnel. Holt groaned but pushed himself up, stumbling after him. The tunnels led to an open cavern, an old mining site with rusted equipment scattered across the floor. But more importantly, a passage on the far side led straight to the research facility. Jonas tapped his comms. "We're almost there." "Holt, can you walk?" Holt grunted, clutching his ribs. "Not well, but I sure as hell ain't staying here." The child tugged on Jonas' sleeve again. It pointed back toward the tunnel. Jonas turned. The specter was gone. His blood ran cold. No body. No signs of damage. Just an empty tunnel. Then the voice returned. "You should have taken our offer, Lieutenant." Jonas didn't waste time responding. He ran. Behind him, the tunnel began to shake. Dust and rocks crumbled from the ceiling as something massive shifted within the depths. Jonas had no idea what the Valzur were sending next. But he knew one thing. They weren't running anymore. They were fighting. And if humanity had proven anything in the past, it was that they never backed down. The tunnels opened into a vast cavern, the ceiling so high it was swallowed by darkness. Old mining machines lay abandoned, their rusted forms barely visible in the dim emergency lights. Jonas Carter stopped to catch his breath, his rifle still raised. The child clung to his side, trembling. Behind him, Holt leaned against a boulder, breathing hard. Blood dripped from a cut above his brow, mixing with the sweat on his face. The silence was unnerving. The specter had vanished, but Jonas knew it wasn't gone. It was hunting them. "We need to keep moving," Jonas said, scanning the cavern. There were two paths. One led deeper underground, an endless maze of tunnels. The other led straight to the abandoned research facility, where they could finally send a distress signal. Holt spat onto the ground. "I swear, that thing should be dead." Jonas didn't argue. He had seen the specter take a direct, explosive hit. No ordinary soldier could have survived. But the Veil Zur weren't ordinary. A faint noise echoed through the cavern. Not footsteps. Not drones. Something worse. Jonas tapped Holt's shoulder. "Go. Now." They ran. The research station wasn't far, just past an old mining bridge that stretched across a deep chasm. Jonas reached the bridge first, stepping onto the metal platform. It groaned under his weight. The entire structure was rusted, barely holding together after years of neglect. One wrong step, and it could collapse. Holt stopped beside him. "This thing's not gonna hold," he muttered. Jonas didn't have time to argue. He turned to the child. "You first. Go slow." The child hesitated, looking up at Jonas with wide, uncertain eyes. Then it stepped forward, carefully placing its feet on the narrow beams. Jonas followed closely behind, keeping his eyes on the far end of the bridge. They were almost halfway across when the child suddenly stopped. Jonas frowned. "Keep moving." The child didn't respond. Instead, it turned its head slightly, as if listening to something Jonas couldn't hear. Then, in a small, broken voice, it whispered, "They're here." Jonas barely had time to react before a plasma bolt ripped through the air. The shot struck the bridge just behind them, metal shrieking as a section of the platform crumbled into the abyss. Jonas spun around. The specter stood at the entrance of the cavern, its red eyes glowing like burning embers. Behind it, more drones hovered, their weapons charging. Jonas raised his rifle and fired. The specter moved like a shadow, dodging the bullets effortlessly. The drones returned fire, forcing Jonas to drop to one knee as plasma bolts struck the metal beams around him. Holt growled, lifting his grenade launcher. "Screw this." He fired. The grenade exploded near the specter's feet, blasting dust and debris into the air. The creature vanished into the smoke. Jonas grabbed the child's arm. "Move." They ran. The far end of the bridge was only a few steps away when a loud crack split the air. Jonas turned just in time to see Holt stumble. A plasma bolt had struck his shoulder. Jonas lunged, grabbing Holt before he could fall off the edge. Holt gritted his teeth, his face twisted in pain. "Go," Holt groaned. Jonas shook his head. "Not leaving you behind." The metal beneath them shuddered. More plasma shots slammed into the bridge. The entire structure groaned, swaying dangerously. Then, from the smoke, the specter emerged. It was fast. Too fast. It sprinted across the bridge, closing the distance in seconds. Jonas lifted his rifle, but before he could fire, the child did something unexpected. It stepped forward. The specter hesitated. Jonas saw it, the briefest flicker of something in its stance. Uncertainty. Then the child spoke. "You don't have to do this," it said in a voice too calm for the chaos around them. The specter didn't respond. It stood motionless, its red eyes locked onto the child. Jonas tightened his grip on his rifle. He didn't understand what was happening, but he wasn't going to waste the opportunity. He grabbed Holt and hauled him forward. The bridge creaked beneath them, barely holding together. The specter took a slow step forward. Then another. The child's hands clenched into fists. Its voice trembled, but it remained firm. "You know the truth." Jonas had no idea what it meant, but the words clearly affected the specter. The Veil Zur warrior stiffened, its body language shifting from predator to something else. Uncertainty. Fear. Then a new sound rumbled through the cavern. A deep mechanical hum. Jonas looked up. His blood ran cold. Above them, the warship had moved directly over the cavern entrance. The ceiling was cracking. Rocks tumbled down as something massive began descending from the darkness. A Valzur Annihilator-class mech. Jonas had heard about them, but never seen one in person. Towering at nearly 20 feet, its armored frame gleamed under the dim lights. Twin plasma cannons extended from its arms, and its head was nothing more than a sleek, faceless visor. It had one purpose: total extermination. Jonas knew they were out of time. He grabbed the child and pulled it across the last few feet of the bridge. Holt stumbled behind him, barely able to move. They reached solid ground just as the mech's massive feet slammed onto the other side of the bridge. The impact was too much. With a final, ear-splitting groan, the entire structure collapsed. Jonas turned in time to see the specter fall into the abyss, its red eyes disappearing into the darkness below. The drones were caught in the wreckage, vanishing with it. But the mech stood on the edge, its massive frame barely shifting. Then, with terrifying precision, it leaped. Jonas pushed the child forward. Run. The research facility was just ahead, its steel doors barely visible through the dust and debris. They sprinted toward it, their boots pounding against the metal floor. Jonas hit the door's control panel. Come on, come on. The doors groaned, then slid open. They rushed inside just as the mech fired its cannons. The blast slammed into the ground behind them. Jonas barely had time to throw himself forward as the heat seared his back. He crashed onto the floor, breathing hard. The doors slammed shut behind them. Silence. Jonas rolled onto his side, his vision swimming. Holt groaned beside him, clutching his wound. The child sat against the wall, breathing heavily. For the first time since this nightmare began, they had a moment to breathe. But Jonas knew it wouldn't last. The Valzur weren't just hunting them anymore. They were coming to erase them. Jonas Carter pushed himself off the cold steel floor, his chest heaving. The air inside the research facility was stale, thick with the scent of dust and burned circuitry. The heavy doors behind him groaned as the outer locks sealed, cutting them off from the battlefield outside. The child huddled in the corner, its large, dark eyes fixed on Jonas, fear etched into its small face. Holt groaned beside him, still clutching his shoulder wound. Jonas turned to the central control panel. The facility was running on emergency power, enough to keep the doors locked, but not much else. He tapped a few keys, watching the system flicker to life. A holographic interface projected in front of him, distorted and filled with static. "Come on, give me something," he muttered under his breath. A faint signal pulsed in the corner of the screen. It was weak, barely cutting through the enemy's jamming field, but it was there. Jonas' fingers flew across the controls, amplifying the transmission. "This is Lieutenant Jonas Carter of the Blackridge Colony Defense Force. We are under attack by the Valzur, requesting immediate reinforcement. Priority Alpha." Static. Then, a voice. "Lieutenant Carter, you're breaking up. Say again." Jonas' heart pounded. The signal had reached someone. "We have a Valzur warship in orbit. They're wiping us out. We need backup now." The voice on the other end crackled, distorted by interference. "Acknowledged. Fleet dispatched. ETA." The signal cut off. Jonas cursed under his breath. The jamming field was still active, but at least he had sent something through. Now, the only question was whether it was enough. A deep metallic boom shook the facility. Jonas spun around. The Valzur Annihilator mech was outside, its massive frame silhouetted through the reinforced glass viewport, its twin plasma cannons powered up, glowing with deadly energy. "We need to move," Jonas said, helping Holt to his feet. "Now." Another boom. The mech raised one of its arms, aiming directly at the entrance. Jonas grabbed the child and sprinted down the corridor just as the first plasma blast struck. The explosion rocked the entire structure, sending sparks and debris flying. Holt stumbled but kept moving, his breath ragged. They reached a secondary control room. Jonas slammed his palm against the console, sealing the inner blast doors behind them. A thick wall of reinforced steel slammed shut, cutting them off from the mech. For now, Holt coughed, wiping sweat from his forehead. That thing's not gonna stop, is it? Jonas shook his head. No, and it's not alone. He tapped into the security feeds. The cameras outside flickered to life, displaying the carnage unfolding in the ruins of Blackridge Colony. The Vel'Zir weren't just deploying drones anymore. They had sent their ground troops. Dozens of sleek, armored soldiers moved through the colony streets in tight formation, their plasma rifles glowing under the stormy sky. The invasion had begun. Jonas clenched his fists. Reinforcements were on the way, but they might not arrive in time. If humanity was going to survive, they had to fight. Holt pulled himself upright, his face grim. What's the plan? Jonas turned to the child. The Spectre knew you. The child hesitated before nodding. It knew the truth. Jonas frowned. What truth? The child took a slow, shaky breath. Not all Vel'Zir want this war. Some of them know the Empire is wrong. They know we are not the enemy. But the warlords, it paused, eyes darkening. They will not stop. Not until they have erased every last human. Jonas exhaled sharply. It didn't matter if some Vel'Zir disagreed. The ones hunting them weren't interested in peace. They were here to exterminate. The floor vibrated beneath them. The mech was moving again, circling the facility like a predator waiting for its prey to break. Jonas scanned the room. The facility was old, but it had defenses. He spotted a weapons locker in the corner and rushed to pry it open. Inside, he found exactly what he needed: high-impact explosives and an EMP launcher. He tossed a pack to Holt. We're bringing that thing down. Holt smirked despite the pain. Now you're talking. Jonas turned to the child. Stay here. No matter what happens, don't open that door. The child's eyes filled with worry, but it nodded. Jonas and Holt moved through the side corridor, reaching a service hatch that led outside. Jonas pried it open, stepping into the storm. Rain lashed against his armor. The Vel'Zir warship loomed above, its hull illuminated by flashes of lightning. Jonas spotted the mech. It had moved to the far side of the facility, its cannons scanning for targets. Jonas raised the EMP launcher. He had one shot. He took a deep breath and fired. The pulse shot through the air, slamming into the mech's back. Its body seized, blue energy crackling through its systems. It staggered, its weapons flickering. Jonas didn't hesitate. He sprinted forward, slapping an explosive charge onto its leg. Holt did the same, planting another charge on its shoulder. The mech's systems rebooted faster than expected. Its red eyes flared to life. Jonas grabbed Holt and dived for cover just as the mech swung its massive arm. The impact shattered the ground where they had just been standing. Detonated. Holt yelled. Jonas slammed the trigger. The explosions ripped through the mech's body. Fire and metal erupted into the stormy sky. The shockwave sent Jonas and Holt sprawling. When the smoke cleared, the mech was destroyed. But they weren't done yet. Jonas looked up at the warship. If the Empire wanted total war, then humanity was going to give them a fight they'd never forget. And for the first time, the Vel'Zir warlords would know fear. Jonas Carter pulled himself to his feet, the heat from the burning wreckage washing over him. The Annihilator mech lay in ruins, its once imposing form reduced to smoldering debris. Sparks flew from its shattered frame, its glowing red eyes now lifeless. Holt groaned beside him, clutching his side. Tell me that was the biggest thing they had. Jonas wiped the rain from his face, staring up at the Vel'Zir warship looming overhead. Not even close. The battle wasn't over. The colony's streets had turned into a war zone. Vel'Zir soldiers marched in formation, their sleek armor reflecting the flickering fires around them. Plasma fires streaked through the air, burning into buildings, turning metal to slag. Human resistance fighters. the last survivors of Blackridge Colony, had taken up arms, barricading themselves in alleyways and ruined structures, fighting with everything they had. But they were outnumbered, outgunned, and Jonas knew they couldn't hold out much longer. He turned toward the research facility. The child was still inside. They had fought so hard to protect it, but now it was only a matter of time before the Val'Zir broke through. Jonas clenched his jaw. They needed a miracle. A deep rumble echoed through the sky. At first, Jonas thought it was the storm. Then he saw them. Human warships. They dropped out of hyperspace, their massive hulls slicing through the dark clouds. Fighters poured from their launch bays, their engines flaring bright as they dove toward the battlefield. Jonas grabbed his radio, his heart pounding. "This is Lieutenant Carter to incoming fleet. We need immediate fire support." A voice crackled through the static. "Copy that, Lieutenant. We're here to bring the hammer down." The sky erupted with fire. Missiles streaked toward the Val'Zir warship. Turrets spun, energy shields flickered, and explosions rippled across its surface. Human fighters weaved between enemy drones, blasting them apart in quick surgical strikes. But the Val'Zir weren't retreating. They fought back with brutal precision, their warships' plasma cannons lighting up the battlefield. More enemy dropships descended, spilling fresh waves of soldiers onto the ground. Jonas knew what they were doing. They were buying time. The Val'Zir warlords didn't care about the lives of their own troops. They were keeping the battle going just long enough to wipe out the colony and the child. Jonas turned to Holt. "We need to get the kid out of here. Now." Holt coughed, nodding. "Got any bright ideas?" Jonas glanced at the ruined mech, an idea forming in his mind. It was risky, but they had no choice. He sprinted back toward the research facility. The child stood near the control panel, eyes wide as it watched the battle unfold through the reinforced glass. Jonas knelt beside it. "Listen to me. We're getting you out of here." The child hesitated. "They will not stop." Jonas nodded. "Neither will we." He grabbed an emergency beacon transmitter from the console. "We need to get you on a ship. If we can send out a distress signal on an encrypted frequency, maybe." Before he could finish, a loud crash shook the facility. Jonas spun around. The Val'Zir had breached the doors. 4 armored warriors stepped inside, their plasma rifles aimed directly at him. Their leader, a towering soldier with obsidian black armor, took a slow step forward. "Hand over the child." Jonas gripped his rifle tighter, stepping in front of the child. "Not gonna happen." The Val'Zir warrior tilted its head. "You are outnumbered. Outmatched. There is no victory here." Jonas took a deep breath. Funny thing about humans. He pressed a detonator. The explosive charges they had planted earlier along the facility's support beams detonated at once. The entire structure shook, and sections of the ceiling collapsed, blocking the entrance. Smoke and debris filled the air, giving Jonas and Holt just enough time to grab the child and run. They sprinted through a side exit, emerging back into the chaos of the battlefield. The human warships were engaging the enemy full force now, their cannons hammering the Val'Zir defenses. But the enemy wasn't going down easy. Jonas spotted a docking bay at the far end of the colony. If they could get to it, they might still have a way off this rock. "Move," he shouted, dragging Holt forward. Plasma bolts hissed past them, kicking up dust and shattered stone. Then a shadow loomed overhead. The Val'Zir warlord had followed them. It moved faster than any soldier should have been able to, its blade humming with deadly energy. Jonas barely had time to raise his rifle before the warrior lunged. The impact threw him off his feet. He hit the ground hard, his weapon skidding out of reach. The warlord loomed over him, raising its blade for the killing strike. Then the child stepped forward. "Stop," it said. The warlord hesitated. "You know the truth," the child said softly. "You feel it, don't you? The warlords have lied to you. To all of you." Jonas watched in stunned silence as the towering alien warrior hesitated. Its grip on the blade faltered. Then, behind them, a human dropship descended. Reinforcements. The warlord turned its head toward the ship, then back to the child. Something flickered in its crimson eyes. Doubt. Jonas didn't waste the moment. He lunged, grabbing his sidearm and firing 3 precise shots. The warlord staggered back, its armor sparking. It let out a guttural growl, but did not pursue. Jonas grabbed the child, hauling it toward the dropship. Holt was already inside, his face pale from blood loss. The ship's pilot yelled over the radio. "Get in, now." Jonas didn't look back. The ramp sealed shut, and the dropship lifted off, engines roaring as they broke free from the battlefield below. Jonas collapsed into his seat, his breath ragged. Through the viewport, he saw the human fleet gaining the upper hand. The Valzur warship was breaking apart, its engines crippled by relentless missile strikes. The enemy was retreating. Against all odds, humanity had won. Jonas turned to the child, who stared out at the stars with an unreadable expression. "You're safe now," he said. The child nodded. For now. Jonas exhaled. The war wasn't over. But tonight, humanity had defied the impossible. And for the first time, the Valzur Empire had learned a painful truth. Humans never stop fighting. The hum of the dropship's engines filled the cabin, a steady sound that should have been comforting, but all Jonas Carter could hear was the silence. The kind that came after battle. The kind that made the weight of everything settle into his chest like a crushing force. He sat against the cold metal wall, his armor scorched, his body aching from bruises he hadn't even registered during the fight. Across from him, Holt was slumped in his seat, his face pale, his uniform soaked with blood from the wound in his side. The medics had patched him up as best they could, but he was barely holding on. Jonas clenched his jaw. Too many good people had died today. He looked at the child, who sat quietly beside him, its large, dark eyes gazing out at the endless stars beyond the viewport, the same stars where a Valzur warship had fallen, where the enemy had been forced to retreat. Humanity had won a battle no one expected them to survive. And yet, Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The pilot's voice crackled over the comms. "Approaching command ship. Prepare for docking." Jonas pushed himself up, his muscles screaming in protest. He walked over to Holt, gripping his shoulder. "You still with me?" Holt let out a weak chuckle. "Barely. But I'm not dying before I rub this in those bastards' faces." Jonas smirked, but the humor didn't last. He knew the cost of this battle, the soldiers they had lost, the colony that had been reduced to ruins, the people they couldn't save. He looked at the child again. "We're not out of this yet, are we?" The child shook its head. "No, the warlords will return." Jonas took a deep breath. He had known the answer before he even asked the question. The Valzur Empire had suffered a humiliation today. They weren't going to forget it. But today, humanity had proven something. They were not weak. They were not prey. They were fighters, survivors, and no empire in the galaxy would ever underestimate them again. The docking bay doors opened with a hiss, and Jonas stepped onto the command ship's deck. Officers and soldiers stood waiting, their faces a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and grim determination. A high-ranking officer stepped forward. "Lieutenant Carter, you and your team just did the impossible." Jonas shook his head. "We did what we had to." The officer's gaze shifted to the child. "Is it true? The Valzur were after it." Jonas nodded. "They'd wanted it dead, which means it's important. More important than we understand." The child met the officer's gaze, its small hands clenched into fists. "The warlords fear what I know. That is why they want me gone." The officer crossed his arms. "Then we'll make sure that doesn't happen." Jonas felt the weight in his chest ease, just a little. He had spent most of his life fighting wars, watching humanity scrape and claw for survival. But this felt different. This felt like the beginning of something bigger.